Power is the ability to get what you want, and influence is the way you make others want to give it to you. French and Raven identified 5 classic bases of power: legitimate formal authority, reward, control of benefits, coercive control of punishments, expert knowledge, and referent personal charisma. Imagine a US manager, legitimate power, meeting a Japanese supplier. In the United States, the manager's title may carry weight, but in Japan, a higher PDI, power distance index, means people expect a strong hierarchy, so the supplier may defer more strongly to the manager's status. Conversely, in a low PDI culture like Denmark, the same manager's formal title matters less. The supplier looks for expert or referent power. Does the manager understand the technology? How friendly and trustworthy are they? Therefore, when negotiating across cultures, you must first diagnose which power bases the other side respects, cultural PDI, and then choose influence tactics that match those bases. Prestige for high PDI, expertise for low PDI, and reward or coercion only when they are culturally acceptable. The combination of French and Raven's typology, micro-level power, with Hofstede's PDI, macro-level cultural expectation, gives you a 2-layer map of who can talk, who can decide, and why in a cross-cultural deal. Explanation. Several scholars have created easy-to-remember cultural dimensions that shape how people negotiate. Hofstede offers 6: power distance, individualism collectivism, masculinity femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. Trompenars adds dimensions like universalism versus particularism, rules versus relationships, and achievement versus ascription, who gets status. Hall talks about high versus low context communication, how much meaning is hidden in the situation. Exam tip. Individualism versus collectivism predicts who will sign a contract. In an individualistic setting such as the United States or United Kingdom, the negotiator signs personally. In a collectivist setting such as China or India, the sign-off may require senior family or clan approval. Uncertainty avoidance explains tolerance for vague terms. Low UAI cultures, for example Sweden, are comfortable with "let's revisit this later." High UAI cultures, such as Japan, want precise clauses and many contingency plans. High context versus low context tells you how much you need to read between the lines. A German, low context, will say exactly what they mean. An Arab, high context, may convey meaning through silence, tone, and gestures. Missing these cues often leads to deadlocked talks. Real-world analogy. Think of negotiating as cooking a dish. Hofstede's dimensions are the main ingredients: salt, sugar, spice. Trompenars adds cooking methods, grilling versus steaming. Hall tells you whether the chef writes the recipe down, low context, or passes it on by demonstration, high context. Master chefs, MBA students, must know which ingredients, methods, and communication style to use for each cultural kitchen. Practical study strategy. Create a 1-page cheat sheet that lists the top 3 dimensions for each major region: North America, Western Europe, East Asia, Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and note the typical negotiation behavior that flows from each dimension. This sheet will be a quick reference during case exam analysis. Explanation: negotiation can be split into 2 broad tactics: distributive, divide the pie, and integrative, grow the pie. In a high-context culture, e.g. Japan, Arab states the relationship and harmony are part of the pie, so integrative tactics that focus on mutual interests work better. Imagine 2 firms negotiating a joint venture. They first spend hours sharing stories, building trust, and then look for value-adding options, such as technology sharing. This is integrative. In a low-context culture, e.g. USA, Germany, parties often jump straight to numbers, treat the negotiation as a zero-sum game, and use distributive tactics like anchoring with a high opening price and making small concessions. Analogy: think of a game of tug of rope. In low-context cultures, the rope is thin and the teams pull hard. Distributive. In high-context cultures, the rope is a wide ladder. The teams can step onto it together, climbing higher. Integrative. Information sharing: high context negotiators share background information to signal trust. Low context negotiators share only what is strictly necessary. Concession style: high context cultures make gradual concessions that are often symbolic. Low context cultures may make large quantifiable concessions to signal seriousness. Decision speed: low context parties aim for quick closure. High context parties may spend weeks on relationship building before numbers are even discussed. Exam focus: identify which culture is dominant, then recommend the appropriate tactic. If a case mixes cultures, e.g. a German firm and a Saudi partner, suggest a hybrid approach: start with low-context data-driven anchoring, then shift to high-context relationship rituals before finalizing the agreement. Game theory treats negotiation as a strategic game, where each side chooses actions to maximize its payoff. The simplest tool is a payoff matrix. Suppose two firms, A from a low-context culture and B from a high-context culture. Each can choose cooperate C or compete D. The matrix can look like: row A cooperate, column B cooperate 8-8. Row A cooperate, column B compete 2-9. Row A compete, column B cooperate 9-2. Row A compete, column B compete 3-3. Numbers are utility values, meaning how happy each party is. A utility function, U sub I, converts real-world outcomes price and delivery time into a single number using weights. Example: U sub A equals 0.6 times profit plus 0.4 times relationship score. Expected value, abbreviated EV, for a mixed strategy is calculated by multiplying each payoff by its probability. If A believes B will cooperate 60% of the time, A's expected value for choosing C is: expected value of C equals 0.6 times 8 plus 0.4 times 2 equals 4.8 plus 0.8 equals 5.6. Expected value of D equals 0.6 times 9 plus 0.4 times 3 equals 5.4 plus 1.2 equals 6.6. Thus, A would prefer D compete if only short-term profit matters. Cross-cultural twist: the probability of cooperation can be estimated from cultural dimensions. High power distance index or high collectivism societies usually assign a higher probability to cooperation, trust in hierarchy or group. Adjust the probabilities accordingly and recalculate expected values. Exam tip: show the matrix, define the utility functions for each side, plug in cultural adjusted probabilities, compute expected values, and state the equilibrium. For example, Nash equilibrium, where both choose D. This demonstrates quantitative rigor and cultural insight together. Explanation: BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is the fallback plan. ZOPA, zone of possible agreement, is the overlap between each side's acceptable outcomes. In multicultural deals, both numbers shift because each culture values different things: price versus relationship. Example 1, US-German joint venture. US firm's minimum profit margin 12%, price only focus. German firm's minimum includes profit 10% plus a relationship score of 4 out of 10. They need a long-term partnership. US BATNA, another partner offering 13% margin. German BATNA, a local supplier with 9% margin but no relationship bonus. ZOPA calculation: convert German relationship need into monetary terms. For example, each relationship point equals about 0.5% margin. So German's effective minimum equals 10% plus 4 times 0.5%, which is 12%. Overlap equals 12% to 13% for US and 12% to infinity for German. The ZOPA is 12% to 13% margin. Adjustment: if the German side learns that US culture values speed more than margin, they may lower the relationship weight, widening the ZOPA. Example 2, Indian-Swedish supply contract. Indian seller values upfront payment, cash flow, and reputation high face. Swedish buyer values low price and on-time delivery. Indian BATNA, sell to a local buyer for $100 per unit cash now. Swedish BATNA, buy from another Asian supplier for $95 per unit. Indian minimum acceptable price equals $100 plus $5 face premium. Swedish maximum price equals $95. Initial ZOPA is none. 100 plus 5 is greater than 95. Negotiation move: introduce a payment schedule, partial cash now, rest on delivery, reduces Indian cash flow need by $3, and adds a delivery guarantee bonus for Sweden worth $4. New effective minima: Indian $102, Swedish maximum $99, still no overlap. Final adjustment: Add a long-term partnership clause valued by India at $6. Indian effective minimum becomes $96. Now ZOPA is $96 to $99. Agreement reached at $97. Takeaway: calculate BATNA and ZOPA in the base currency, then translate cultural preferences, relationship, reputation, risk aversion into monetary equivalents. Adjust numbers iteratively until the zones overlap. Exam tip: show the step-by-step conversion of non-price factors into dollar values, then present the final ZOPA range. Explanation: to see how a country's power distance index, PDI, influences bargaining power, we can run a simple regression. Model: leverage sub I equals beta 0 plus beta 1 times PDI sub I plus epsilon I, where leverage sub I is the percentage of total concessions a party extracts in a series of negotiations. PDI sub I is the country's Hofstede PDI score 0 to 100, and epsilon I is the error term. Example data: fictional. Country: Sweden PDI 31 average concession 12%, United States 40 15%, Japan 54 22%, Mexico 81 35%, India 77 33%. Running OLS gives beta 0 approximately 5% baseline concession when PDI equals 0. Beta 1 approximately 0.35 each point of PDI adds 0.35% concession power. Interpretation: a negotiator from a high PDI culture. For example, India, PDI 77, can expect roughly 5% plus 0.35 times 77, approximately 32% higher leverage than a low PDI negotiator. Correlation check: compute Pearson R between PDI and concession percent arrow are approximately 0.96, indicating a very strong positive relationship. Extension dash concession patterns: if we model the size of each concession, delta price, as a function of PDI and negotiation stage T: delta price sub IT equals alpha 0 plus alpha 1 times PDI sub I plus alpha 2 times T plus epsilon sub IT, where T equals 1 first offer to 5 final stage. Empirically, alpha 1 is positive high PDI parties make larger early concessions to preserve face, while alpha 2 is negative concessions shrink over time. Exam application: provide the regression equation, explain beta 1 meaning, discuss statistical significance, t-value, p-value less than 0.05, and link the result to negotiation strategy. For example, in high PDI settings, plan for more staged symbolic concessions, and be ready to accept larger upfront offers. Quick check: if a German negotiator, PDI 35, faces a Mexican negotiator, PDI 81, the expected leverage gap equals 0.35 times parentheses 81 minus 35 close parentheses, approximately 16.1%, meaning the Mexican side will likely secure about 16% more favorable terms if the same tactics are used. Explanation: ethics in international negotiation revolve around 3 questions: legitimacy of power, fairness of influence, and respect for cultural norms. Key concepts: 1. Legitimate power versus coercive power. Using legal authority, for example, a government-mandated export quota, is generally seen as legitimate, while threatening to pull a future contract for unrelated reasons is coercive and may be judged unethical. 2. Universal versus relativist ethics. Universalists argue that certain standards, no bribery, no forced labor, apply everywhere. Relativists say local customs, gift-giving, facilitation fees may be morally acceptable in that context. 3. Procedural justice. Even if outcomes differ, negotiators should follow transparent processes, share agenda, allow the other side to speak, avoid hidden agendas. Sample examination questions. Case: a Swedish firm offers a modest cash gift to a Chinese counterpart to smooth talks. Discuss whether this act is ethically permissible under a universalist ethics, B. cultural relativism, and C. the Swedish firm's corporate code of conduct. Short answer: explain how the concept of legitimate power derived from Hofstede's low PDI cultures can be used to justify a request for joint decision-making without resorting to coercion. Essay: compare the ethical implications of using expert power, technical superiority, versus referent power, personal charisma, when negotiating a merger between an Indian and a German company. Study tip: frame every ethical analysis with the three-step rubric. Identify the power base, assess legitimacy, legal or contractual versus cultural, and evaluate fairness, distribution of benefits, transparency. This structure will earn marks for both depth and clarity. Meta-analysis aggregates findings from many empirical studies to estimate the average effect of culture on negotiation success. Steps. 1. Collect studies that report a success metric, for example deal closure rate or value created, and a cultural index such as Hofstede PDI or Hall context. 2. Convert outcomes to a common effect size, such as Cohen's d. D equals the difference between x bar high and x bar low divided by SD pooled. Where x bar high is the mean success rate for high PDI cultures, x bar low for low PDI, and SD pooled the pooled standard deviation. 3. Weight each study by its inverse variance. Larger samples get more weight. The overall effect d hat is d hat equals the sum of w sub I times d sub I divided by the sum of w sub I, with w sub I equals 1 divided by the variance of d sub I. 4. Test heterogeneity using Q statistic. Q equals the sum over I of w sub I times the square of the difference between d sub I and d hat. A significant Q, p less than 0.05, means effects vary across contexts, perhaps due to sector or negotiation type. 5. Interpretation. Small effect d approximately 0.2 suggests culture has modest impact. Medium d approximately 0.5 indicates a noticeable influence. Large d greater than or equal to 0.8 signals strong cultural determinants. Illustrative result. Suppose 10 studies yield a pooled d equals 0.56, 95% confidence interval 0.3 to 0.82 for PDI's effect on negotiation value creation. This medium to large effect tells us that high PDI cultures, on average, achieve 0.56 standard deviations higher deal value, likely because they accept hierarchical concessions that boost the seller's bottom line. Hypothesis testing example. Null hypothesis, PDI has no impact on closure rate d equals 0. Alternative hypothesis, PDI positively influences closure rate d greater than 0. Compute z equals d hat divided by the standard error of d hat. If z equals 3.2, p less than 0.001, reject the null hypothesis. Exam tip: when asked to evaluate cultural impact, outline the meta-analysis workflow, give a brief numeric example, and explain what the confidence interval and heterogeneity tell you about reliability and applicability of the findings. Takeaway: empirical evidence shows that cultural dimensions matter, but the size of the effect varies. Understanding how to measure, combine, and interpret those effects equips you to argue convincingly about the